Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss The Punisher 2004, starring Thomas Jane, John Travolta, Laura Herring, Samantha Mathis, and Rebecca Romaine Stamos at the time? I'll call her Rebecca Romaine on this show. And directed by Jonathan Hensley. Now, before I get into this movie, I remember the fanboys were overreacting about The Punisher being a t-shirt in this movie, like this, for example. And I remember seeing this movie quite a few times, and I remember liking it then. And what do I think of it now? Well, let's get into it. The movie starts off in Tampa, Florida, and Mickey Duca, played by Eddie Jemison, who was in the Ocean's 11 trilogy, and there's a lot of fun in here, and I do like his character. But part of the problem is the Punisher in the comic books takes place in New York, meaning he's a New Yorker. Not someone who moves place to place or in Tampa. Frank Castle, played by Thomas Jane. I know this actor from a Stephen King movie called Dreamcatcher, but the man is not one of the greatest actors in my opinion, because he's not a chameleon. But I do like him as the Punisher. I think he does a pretty good job as the character. In the director's cut, we get more with Jimmy Weeks, who was Frank Castle's partner, about how he's the bad guy. If you didn't watch the director's cut, spoiler alert, and I was glad they cut a lot of this shit out. I like John Travolta as a loving family man / villain, and my problem is that he's a family man compared to Frank, who is a horrible father. And here's Travolta's character Howard Saint as a loving father, who's supposed to be the fucking hero versus the fucking villain. It makes no motherfucking sense. I know Laura Herring from David Lynch's Mulholland Drive. As soon as we see her, and it's honestly like she's Darth Vader with her head coming up and the music going like ba-da-da-da. And as soon as she does that, I was like, uh-oh, something is about to go wrong. I've seen Roy Scheider in the Steven Spielberg shark movie Jaws, and he shows up in a thankless role as Frank's father and dies like, what a fucking wasted opportunity for him. As soon as Granny with the martini gets shot, I was like, oh fuck, his whole family is fucked. And when they all get shot up, it was not only sad, but a very brutal way to die in Puerto Rico. Like, that's a vacation spot. Why do you need guns in there? When Frank's wife and son get ran over by a red truck by Quentin Glass, played by Will Patton, I felt very bad for Frank, and he suddenly dies and comes back to life. After Frank becomes the Punisher, we get introduced to his neighbors, named Bumpo, who is a fat person, no offense to the guy that played him, Dave, played by Ben Foster, who I've seen in other things, and Joan, played by Rebecca Romaine, I'm gonna call her, and I honestly have a soft spot for Ben Foster, who's been in other movies like the 310 to Yuma remake and Hell or High Water. And Rebecca Romaine, I'll talk more about her when I get to the X-Men next year. But here, for sure, she is a throwaway, trashy character. The Punisher's revenge plot is so fucking ludicrous, but at the same time, it's so fucking hilarious. Will Patton as Quentin Glass, who is a homosexual, meaning gay, please forgive the pun. I'd also know this actor from Entrapment, but for what little he has to do in here, to be honest, I don't care for his character at all. I do like the Mexican standoff between the Punisher and two Saint guards. I thought that was a great moment in the film. The comedy with Bumpo and Dave, which is in the comic books called Welcome Back Frank. That's a real comic book too, by the way. I've read part of it. But it was funny but inappropriate. But it was a funny but inappropriate moment for the movie, and it's a point where it goes too far. Joan, Bumpo, Dave, and Frank versus Joan's abusive ex-boyfriend, and him playing with knives, and Frank beats his ass was another good moment in the film. The fire thing where firefighters were used to put out the fire was funny, but Frank putting it in front of the parking spot right next to the movie theater. Here's my question. Why the fuck would he have a thing that carries a fire washer thing so that they can put out the fire? Because for the same parking spot? Because that's funny. Also, I heard the director said he's met someone who's done that, so he doesn't find a parking spot for at least 10 years, at least. Mark Colley and his song In Time was a good song and has a very nice singing voice in the diner, and we move on to an action scene with him versus Frank. And that's a good knife to a gunfight scene. I mean, I enjoyed the hell out of it. The best fight in the whole movie was the Punisher versus the Russian. And the way the Punisher throws a grenade at the Russian and the Russian hits it like a baseball bat. And it explodes, and the Punisher takes out a gun, and the Russian smashes it was absolutely fucking hilarious. And they crash in Bumple's apartment, and the Punisher throws tomato sauce at the Russian and breaks his neck. It was such a great fight, in my opinion. Quentin tortures Dave, by pulling his piercings out of his face. Was so fucking painful, and the acting in that scene was bad, like over the top bad. Howard kills Quentin in his own house and kills Olivia on the train tracks, and suddenly Howard gets to the club he owns and to hunt on the Punisher and says, "I need a martini." Was laugh out loud hilarious in my mind. The final action sequence between the Punisher and Howard and his bodyguards was a good action sequence until the Punisher drags Howard on a car and burns him, and the cars explode the Punisher's logo that looked very cheesy as hell. Now it's time for the rating. I'll give this movie a 6.3 out of 10. This may be the best Punisher movie yet to date, but the action here is fucking ludicrous. But Thomas Jane is probably the best Punisher in film by far, and I'm talking only by film. I'm not talking about that TV show since I haven't seen it yet. And it has its funny moments, which makes the movie a guilty pleasure, in my opinion. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me, and I will be back next week with Punisher Warzone. And until next time, the guilty will be punished.